Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Adult Formation this Sunday, where we're exploring a bit of the St. Matthew Passion by Johann Sebastian Bach. We had some technical issues with getting us up to YouTube Live, but hopefully you'll be able to find it later in the day. So let's dive into St. Matthew Passion by Johann Sebastian Bach. It's a fantastic, monumental work of amazing scope and size. And so first, let's take a look at what's happening around the time that this work was presented. It was written in about 1727. So looking at that, it's about Bach's fifth year in Leipzig. He had been in other posts prior to that, but in Leipzig, he was the Thomas cantor, which was the leading cantorate in Germany. And so there he actually was in charge of four other churches, the Thomas Kirche, the Nicholas Kirche, the Neue Kirche, and the Peter Kirche to some degree. Here, Bach's output, this was his master period, if you will. The Grade 18 preludes and fugues come out of this. The Well-Tempered Clavier, over 300 cantatas. We actually lost about 100 of them, but the output was absolutely tremendous. As you can see, February 2nd, he had a premiere of his solo cantata, Ich habe genug, which is for solo voice instead of a choir, which is a little unusual, but there are a few of those around there. Handel becomes a British subject. The Amish first moved to America, although the date on that is not exactly known. And you can see Peter II becomes Tsar of Russia, and other little factoids for you. During this time, they also believed that the six motets came out of kind of extra money for Bach at this time, and his the weddings and for singers, and like I said, his mature masterworks as well. So St. Matthew Passion, what is it? It's an oratorio. So what exactly is an oratorio? It's a large scale, it's almost like an opera, but not. So the church at the time had a decree that there was no opera to be had during Lent. So oratorio was the composer's clever ways of getting around this. Because of that, and because of the no opera, the oratorios took on a definitively sacred tone. They are always about a biblical figure or religious theme, and narrative on that. It's for orchestra, for chorus, and for solo. Any combination therein, they can be smaller or larger, but typically they're of some sort of big scale. And like I said, to replace opera in the time of Lent. They're really fascinating stuff. Handel's Messiah. They're not exclusively for Lent, but they were typically, that's where they started to come out of. There's also no frills. There's no scenery. There's no costume. There's no staging. It's very minimal. It's a very sit down and listen to this story of a biblical figure. So the St. Matthew Passion is a liturgical drama, and it was the framework to be premiered on Good Friday, but it's a liturgical drama, and it's in two parts. And so part one would happen at the beginning, then you'd have about an hour-long sermon, and then you would have the second half of the oratorio of the Passion. And so that, depending on your speeds, you could be in church from anywhere to 3-4 hours, including the sermon. So it was a full event for Good Friday. The Passion Oratorio libretti as a gospel narrative for service. So there's the Brachus Passion was the most popular of these settings at the time. And in the Lutheran tradition, it was often used as was spiritual poetry. It was a paraphrase of all four gospels to be used at once. However, St. Matthew Passion doesn't do this. It's really based on Matthew chapters 26 and 27. And therein, because of that, it's meant to evoke the feelings of the ordinary believers. It's vivid, but it's kind of abstract. So, in other words, it gives you these metaphysical displays of the music, the heartbeat, the touch, the breaking of the bones, nailing to the cross. It's intensely emotional and profoundly physical, and especially with its basis solely on Matthew rather than the other Gospels, it's quite unique in that way. However, the St. Matthew Passion does begin and end with non-narrative text. It's not so much Christ's passion as it's a particular telling of his passion, and through the eyes of those who were there. So who was it by? Who did the libretto come from? Christian Henrici, and he went by the nom de plume of Picander, whom I think we're mostly familiar with in setting of Bach's cantatas. In fact, they were great collaborators from 1725 onwards. And we know that Bach got back to Leipzig got to Leipzig for the first time in 1723. And we don't know whose text was used for the cantata cycle of 1724, 1725, but we do know towards the end of 1725 that these two collaborated with one another. This was actually a side gig, a side hustle for Picander. He was a lawyer by trade, and he supplemented his income by writing this poetry and by writing this religious poetry, the tutoring, even after he found gainful employment as a civil servant. So he still continued to write and collaborate with Bach. In fact, the Sammlung Erfreulicher Gedanken was a text compilation from 1724. So from there, he did a weekly series, essentially, where he put out a different religious poetry every week and then compiled it into this book in 1725. In fact, we find excerpts from St. Matthew Passion in that collection. The next volume that you see underneath, the Ernst Scherztafte, was a 5-volume collection. And all of Bach's cantatas from 1725 onward have the text from somewhere in these volumes. Not necessarily all of them, but a great deal of them come from this collection. Some of them have been lost. Like I said, there were about 100 cantatas that we lost of the 300 that we know that were written. But that last volume, the 5-volume collection, also had text from St. Matthew, and then had funeral music for Prince Leopold when he passed away. And like I said, we are missing about 100 texts, but we do know that Picander was the main collaborator and librettist for the St. Matthew Passion. So the premiere of the work was Good Friday, 1727 at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. And you can see the picture on the right is St. Thomas Kirche, or the Thomas Kirche as it's called. And on the back side of the church, there was a little swallow's nest that had an organ in it, and there was an organ at the front as well. And so really, we don't know when it was officially composed or performed for the first time. It's really pretty much accepted that 1727, we have a good idea that that's what it was, but we know for sure that we can point at 1729. And then there's been research recently that's pointed towards a 1736 performance that we know of for absolute sure. More parts were later prepared for this work. It was a little bit edited, revised over the course of a couple of years, and then there is evidence of a 1742 full score and parts that are actually at the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. This edition actually has a couple of changes in it. So this piece is huge. We'll talk about that in a little while, but arias for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And so some of the arias got rearranged for voice parts. So a bass aria or two got switched to alto. There were 2 organs, like I said, at the church. But we know that in 1740, the organ in the swallow's nest in the back of the church was dismantled. So there's evidence that it was performed with an organ and a harpsichord. And originally there was 1 organ part, and we know that Bach added a second one. And so we think that it was harpsichord at first, but not really sure. This Matthew Passion, it was long brewing with Bach. He knew what he wrote. He knew that it was a masterpiece. And he took meticulous care with this score. This is one of the best preserved scores that we have from Bach. It's in 2 different colors. It's beautifully and exquisitely calligraphied, and it was like he took such painstaking care of it, and then would shut it and put it over his desk. The premiere was horribly received. I don't know that it was, Rite of Spring and Riot sort of deal with Stravinsky, but it wasn't performed again for a long time. People didn't know what to do with it, really. It was so monumental, it was so long, and it was just such a major work, and from these different perspectives, rather than from exactly like the Passion, from the perspective of Christ, not like a 7 last words, but it was, like I said earlier, an experiential thing from us who would have been there. So he put it away, and it was silent for 80 years. He performed it twice in his lifetime, but after that, it did not come around for a long time. In fact, the first edition score doesn't show up until the 1830s. I think Sotheby's was actually just auctioning it off. So if anybody wants to purchase the original version, it was just up for auction. Yours for a steal of something like £8,000. The performances now, and performance practice, there's a lot of varying degrees of interpretation on early music. And so there's a couple of different traditions that are behind it. So with the early music movement, it is hip performances, historically informed performances. They typically tend to be a little lighter, a little faster. They're more dance-like. So it kind of gives an air of flippancy, and it loses the gravitas. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the romantic style of things. The Mengelberg tradition. He was a Dutch composer who brought the Passion tradition to Amsterdam. In fact, the St. Matthew Passion is one of the best loved and known works of the classical repertoire in Amsterdam and the Netherlands on whole. In fact, the month leading up to Easter, it's always heard. It's from little to big to great to small. It's always around. And so on the other, you have that end of the romantic spectrum, and then you also have the Furtwängler tradition of the Berlin Philharmonic. And so these things, do you have romantic Bach? Do you have historically informed Bach? The music gets distorted in 2 directions. So trying to find a balance of that, to not make it inconsequential or silly, but to maintain that the gravitas while ensuring a true performance of it. So, like I said, it's huge. It is a massive, massive work. It's the Mount Everest, if you will, of repertoire in the classical repertoire. It's a tradition with a holy aura, as Peter Sellers would say. Simon Rattle studied the score for 20, 30 years before he even touched it. It's massive. It's written for double orchestra, double choir, and something like 12, 13 solos, depending on how you break it out. And it presents these wonderful juxtapositions of being together and alone, of light, of dark, of contrast, of good and evil. You have both choruses and both orchestras raging together, and then you'll find yourself transported to a soloist with a lone violin or lone oboe or cello and just minimal underneath it. It's a tonal allegory in that it presents these extra musical ideas. So tonal allegory is, as you can see, a relationship of coherence between a musical element and something extra musical. So an example of this is like a triad, like do, mi, sol, mi, do, 3 notes, the Trinity, right? So you see this extra musical representation. And therein, you can also deal with representation via sharps, flats, key signatures, what key goes to where. And it's the widest ranging piece of Bach. In other words, it has more key signatures in it than any other thing, and non-normative in that way. So the Passion specifically. So St. John Passion does this as well. It jumps around, it has sharp contrast and changes between these key signatures that aren't necessarily closely related theoretically. Uh, Unlike something like Beethoven Sonata or any of the Bach cantatas. In other words, you have in these cantatas uh, musical ideas that come and go, key and tonal structures that are consistent throughout the piece. Well, that's just disregarded in the Passions. It's far more fluid in its ability to change its mood and affect, and it really makes for striking contrast on that part. And the Christmas oratorio or the Mass in B minor, they also stick to that same sort of structure within itself. But then you get to this, and it just breaks the mold on everything. The chorales are a major structural pillar of this work. They're the heartbeat. Oftentimes, the chorales in and throughout this piece get treated as a commercial break. We now break for our sponsor, but they're really they're the foundation, the core of this. And these chorale tunes would have been known and loved by everybody. So the harmonies might have been different, but the people who would have been attending the Passion would have recognized these from their tradition and their upbringing. It's they're moments of consciousness. They're questions. They ask you to dive deep, to examine where it is you're coming and going and what's happening, finding the answers to the things that you don't have answers for. The contrast that you find in these two, the way that they can be so fiercely introverted and at the same time fiercely extroverted, and casting these questions and these doubts and what's going on, they're magnificent, and they prove to be the structure and the basis of the whole work. And then the choruses show up out of nowhere. You're going from these striking, blood-curdling scenes that present this fierce, crucify him, or who hit you, prophesy, and then it switches to these chorales that just come in, and it's cast this aura of light, and again, the questions, the making us go within ourselves to answer and to try to respond to what Bach has put before us. And it comes to it as a way for us to realize this didn't happen just 2,000 years ago. It's also, what have I done? It's something I do every day as sinning against God, and Bach gets rid of this culture of victim and blame in the Matthew Passion, and it really does make you ask yourself, what is it that I have done? What is it that I do? It's really trying to get the listener to experience this music, to feel, to go in and ask those hard questions. And everything in this piece is a call and response. As I said when we began, it's two choirs and two orchestras with numerous soloists. So chorus 1 listens half the night. Chorus 2 plays half the night and then listens half the night. Same with orchestra 1 and orchestra 2. It's, it's very, the way that we encounter it often, it goes back and forth between that like official Victorian nature, and this is, the idea of a ceremonial occasion. So the sit down, shut up, this is the doctrine of the church, be changed. But it's so much more than just that. There's so much that we can gain from the participation, the personal ritual of real transformation in this piece. It's not, there was another conductor, the Carl Richter, it very much is the sit down and listen. This is the doctrine that we encounter. But as it turns out, art like this is one of the ways that we can talk about religion without that goes beyond that supersedes the dogma. It's like a masterpiece by Michelangelo. In again, these vivid metaphysical representations, the cracking of the bones, the placing of the thorns, it makes the listener really dive into themselves personally and to evaluate. It's really remarkable in that way. It also features Mary Magdalene, and she has more arias than anyone else in this Passion, which is very strange for the time, because she's the character that has too much emotion. It's the one that's not tasteful to polite society, if you will, and yet Jesus here says, "No, you're going to be by my side, and this is part of your story too." And it's a lot from her eyes, and it's just really, it's layered. It's again, pictorial and vivid and very corporal. Bach was he was a father of 20, so he was very much of the body, and this is a very experiential piece of music, and it's sometimes encountered like that, and it's sometimes not. There's a fabulous recording. There's two. We'll see one later from the All Bach project, which is out of the Netherlands, and they are absolutely tremendous. You can Google them, and they have just about everything Bach ever wrote for singers, chamber music, just anything. And that's their project, is to put everything online. Well, you'll see the music excerpts that we play will go out from the All Bach project. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is a fabulous recording from the Berlin Philharmonic and Peter Sellers. There's a great documentary. A lot of his thoughts and information actually have gone into this presentation. He's done tremendous work, and they've staged it. And the Berlin Philharmonie is it's a pentagonal space, so it's theater in the round. You have 360 degrees around the audience, and so while it's not it's not staged like a play, there's movement in it, and it allows us to see the interaction between Jesus and his disciples, between the two choruses, the mob scenes, the turba choruses, and it really opens up a whole new dimension to this work. I would highly recommend going to the Berlin Philharmonic's website and getting a pass. They have a 7-day pass. You can also do yearly or monthly, but it's fantastic. And so, like good art, it's the little things that mattered. And I found it interesting. Peter Sellers was talking about how it was very similar to him to the Grunewald Eisenach altar, which you can see the Eisenheim altarpiece. This is the first view, and this is alluding to the St. Matthew Passion. From one way you see it, from the next you see it a different way, from the third angle you see it another way, and you can see here. This actually is supposed to be opened throughout the day in stages with music accompanying it. So you see, on first glance, you get image A. Then you get your next image when it opens again that adds this extra layer and dimension and vivid scenes that create and make this piece alive. Then you can see the third and final opening of it when it's something completely different that you hadn't seen. So all these layers, all this text and religious poetry into it create different ways of seeing it. There's no one, everybody hears the words of Jesus differently. Everybody interprets it differently. Everybody can see these different meanings in it. No one's playing with a full deck. You have to work with one another to get the gravitas of all of it that's presented with this work. So again, this nuance through structure, through the way that Bach uses the different choruses, the choruses alone, the different solos, the different instrumentation, and it's really, really of the body. And again, with Mary Magdalene being so present, and it's vividly experiential with this tension, and how Bach is asking for us through this music to really dive deep. So all these images are created, like we talked about earlier with the musical allegories and how the shift of keys and the tension that's built through this continuity that's all but thrown to the side like the other works. We create these vivid scenes, and the most times when we can see this the most is through the struggle, and when things are hardest and darkest, that's when we see this. And it's also about this redemption and transformation that occurs through the personal self-examination of the listener. There's some 80 odd numbers in this piece, and it's just magical how the dialogue shifts back and forth. Also with the structure, there's accompagnato and secco recitative. Jesus never appears with a harpsichord like you hear in a lot of the recitative throughout the piece. Jesus always with a group of strings, and it's ethereal and levitates above the music. But I'd like to play for you something now that really showcases that struggle and that Strunentraum, that fire that Bach talks about. And I'll read for you. We'll come in at the end of a alto and soprano duet, but the text to it all, so you can get an idea of the struggle that's being presented. And this is at the Garden of Gethsemane. And behold, my Savior now is taken. Lose him, leave him, bind him not. Moon and stars he have for grief, the night forsaken, since my Savior now is taken. Lose him, leave him, bind him not. They lead him hence, with cords they bind him. So that's where we're starting, but you'll really see the drama pick up at the chorus section with have lightnings and thunder, their fury forgotten. Then open, O fathomless pit, all thy terrors. Destroy them, overwhelm them, devour them, consume them with tumult of rage, the treacherous betrayer, the merciless throng. See the drama that Bach displays in this. It's just absolutely thrilling, and that again is this physical nature of it, the thunder and the lightning, the tumult, the drama, and it's just absolutely magnificent. And it's such a shame. We were supposed to do this here. We weren't going to do the entire St. Matthew Passion, which is really hard to piecemeal. It needs to be done in its entirety, but we were going to perform that, but as we all are, we're in this boat of COVID. So hopefully next year we will do that. Although I guess St. John will come up sooner than that. So these transformative struggles in this piece, and the way that Bach engages the audience to feel, it's just that core that gets your being. You feel the fight and the struggle of Christ being led to his death. And this is just it's overwhelming. You think about it, and 10 days out, you're this small movement that's building and bubbling, and Christ is taken into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and then the next thing you know, this little movement that's turned into a massive world-changing thing is being shut out and destroyed. And it's phenomenal. And so this doubt and affirmation, this engagement of successes and failures throughout these characters that we encounter. And there's more than one meaning to it. It's the intensity and our impulse that it invites us to really evaluate. And so you also have this aloneness and togetherness that's presented throughout the piece. That piece that you just saw, the Thunder and Lightning piece, uses both chorus and all the soloists as well, and both orchestras just go into town, and it's fantastic. On the other end, you have these starkly contrasting, long, beautiful solo melodies and solo arias that are contemplative. So alone, we have Erbarmedic, which is one of the most famous pieces of this entire work, and it's an aria that's asking for mercy after Jesus is denied 3 times. This is sung by Mary Magdalene, and she's singing on behalf of Peter, because Peter can't say anything to her, can't say anything to anyone, really. It's this famous violin melody that sings back and forth to the alto. It's asking these questions it's the act of forgiving someone, truly, not half-heartedly or halfway, but it's this notion of where can we find within ourselves the ability to forgive somebody who's done something so awful and so treacherous and has betrayed us. It reaches deep, and that's that's often said why these melodies are sweeping and so long, because it asks for forgiveness. And sometimes that's a long process to forgive someone, and so they have these long drawn out call and response, because sometimes there's not an easy answer to it. And so following that, we'll play the Erbarmedic for you in a moment, but right in the heart of this, you have this request and portrayal on behalf of Peter from Mary Magdalene, but right after it, it's followed by Judas's aria and his committing of suicide. So on one hand, you have this person that's forgiven, and then you have this person that's not, who goes and commits suicide. Judas is the one who makes the sacrifice. He's the one who betrays the one that he loves. And it's because of his sacrifice that otherwise there would be no crucifixion. There would be no salvation story. And in this, you see Jesus's inconsolable grief about Jesus, but there's this play between the darkness and the light and the forgiveness. And with the Erbarmedic and this violin solo, you have this one who is forgiven, and then you have one who gets hell and damnation right back to back with one another. There's a chorus in between, but it's framed, and this orchestra just erupts and is sharp and spiky, and it interrupts Judas and his singing, and it's essentially saying, well, to hell with you, we don't care. Go kill yourself already. Be done with it. So let's listen to the forgiveness side of things, the Erbarmedic, the plead for mercy. Again, this is the Albach project, which is just, as you can see, tremendous. This, however, is not staged. So again, that juxtaposition, the call and response that we see so often throughout the St. Matthew Passion. So finally, uh, a bit about the human spirit in this piece, as I keep talking about how experiential this piece is, and Bach inviting us in. Uh, it sets us up for this profound grief too, and all about our connectedness and our own personal journey through the exploration of this, and the movements that are all connected between this movement of dialogue and interaction, not the dialogue, the recitatives, and the alternation between one course listening and the other responding, and oftentimes interacting with one another at the same time. And it's really it's more of finding our commonalities throughout all of this. And Bach, Bach was more, he wasn't about affirmation. He lived in a time that was very unforgiving and didn't help a lot. So that idea of the victim didn't sit well with him. He was a very, very pious man. And so inviting you to dive into this text that so clearly is from our perspective, as if we were there looking at the events of Christ's crucifixion. And so at the beginning of this piece, and I'll leave you with this last movement at the end of this, but this sets up the grief and this journey to the cross, and how it's our own personal responsibility to find and to own our actions, to know, to be aware. It's profoundly introverted, but at the same time, this great emotion and passion that's exuded through this. And it's St. Matthew Passion is a lifelong journey, as is one's own journey of faith. It's something that's constantly assessed, and you see these repetitions come up through your life. They're there, and it's like a prayer. You keep seeing them and keep answering and praying until you understand. And so the grief, the first chorus, let me read you the text from it. Come, ye daughters, share my mourning. See him. Who? The bridegroom Christ. See him. How? A spotless lamb, O Lamb of God unspotted. Upon the cross thou art slaughtered. See it. What? His patient love, serene and ever patient. Thou scorned and cruelly tortured. Look where? On our offense, all sin for our sake bearing, else would we die despairing. Look on him for love of us. He himself his cross is bearing. Have pity on us, Jesus. That's one of the brutal natures about this piece. That's exactly it. The chorus one is well, let's back up a minute. And the grief. There are two essential types of grief. There's this inconsolable crying, weeping, wailing, can't stop talking about it, can't process without just talking and getting it out, and just that overwhelmed. And then on the other hand, you have the grief that's shattering, that stops you dead in your tracks. You shut down, you're quiet, you don't talk, you don't want to talk, you don't want to go on. And here we have chorus one, who's this image of, not the inconsolable guilt. And they're singing to chorus two. And that's the look where? Chorus two is getting agitated. It's like, get over it. Look, where? Who cares? What are you talking about? And then out of nowhere, the children come in with this chorale tune. And of course, it's always the children that get it. They sing, Jesus is there. Be patient. Jesus carries our burdens for us. And it's this magical arsis and thesis of these two types of grief, this anger and this inconsolable, heart-breaking torment. And then it's if we were to all have the eyes of children, to have that clarity, that sight that just soars above. And so before we go, I'd like to leave you with the first chorus from the St. Matthew Passion. It's just stunning. It's these tough lessons that this really teaches us, that St. Matthew Passion, through all of its wonderful text and this tonal dimensions that are not to be expected in a typical Bach piece. Yes, it's Bach, but it breaks the molds, and he knew that this was a masterpiece. He took care of it, and it's just a shame that it wasn't well received in his time, but it was well preserved. And then we have the Mount Everest of this sacred setting of Christ's Passion. So thank you for joining me today, and join me next week when we talk a little bit about did you hear that? What are we listening for in music? A brief overview of that, and why we sing what we sing, and how we sing it, and how we get to it. So thank you again, and leaving you today is the opening chorus of the St. Matthew Passion that beautifully displays this call and response, this profound human nature, and the redemption of St. Matthew Passion. If it will load. magnificent work that's so revered today in the classical repertoire. It's really just thrilling, and all the different roles people make careers out of singing the evangelist or Jesus or any number of the main people that we encounter in the Passion, and it's really just tremendous. And I hope you enjoyed a little dive into the St. Matthew Passion. We could talk for days about all the structural nuances and key relations, but I hope this was a good start for you, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks.